Thank you for joining us. We're going to give it just a couple of minutes while people get into the workshop room. We'll get started in just another minute as people are still joining the room. It looks like most folks are in, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for using cover crops to reduce tillage in organic field cropping systems. My name is Bethany Wallace, and I'm with NOFA New York. I'll be helping to facilitate this afternoon's workshop. Erica Warden is also with us on technical support, so if you have any technical issues, feel free to send her a chat and she will help you resolve those problems. Just a reminder, we ask that you do remain muted and turn off your video during presentations. We've enabled closed captioning, and you should be able to see that at the top of your screen if you'd like to select that option. This workshop is being recorded and will be available on the conference website and app shortly after the presentation concludes. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and post any questions to the chat. They will be breaking to take those questions and also reserving time at the end for additional questions. NOFA New York's annual winter conference would not be possible without the support of all of our sponsors. We would specifically like to thank our app sponsors, the Hudson Valley Farm Hub and Honey Dog Farm. To learn more about these organizations and their work, please visit them in the marketplace or online. And now I'd like to introduce our presenters. We're thrilled to have Stuart Farr from the Hudson Valley Hops and Grains, Luke Giaforte from Giaforte Farm, Kristen Luria, and Chris Pelser from the Cornell Sustainable Cropping Systems Lab. Now I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Bethany. So again, my name is Kristen, and I'm an extension support specialist with the Sustainable Cropping Systems Lab. And our lab is led by Dr. Matt Ryan. We're based in the Soil and Crop Science Department at Cornell University here in Ithaca. And our research focuses on many applied aspects of field crop systems, predominantly organic field cropping systems. And in particular, we do a lot of research on ecological weed management, weed ecology systems, and organic no-till. So we're going to kick off this panel with a talk from Chris Pelser. So he's a research support specialist in our lab and leads a lot of our field research, and he'll be talking about a bit of our research as it relates to reducing tillage in organic grain systems. So then we'll hear from Luke and Stuart afterwards. So feel free to, as Bethany mentioned, put your questions in the chat as Chris is speaking, and we'll have a few minutes after he talks to answer any of those questions. So I'll go ahead, I guess, handing it over to Chris.
Thanks, Kristen. Let me get my slides up. Okay, can people see the slides?
Looks good.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Kristen, for the intro, and Bethany and NOFA New York for inviting us and having us here. And yeah, looking forward to some more discussion with with Stuart and Luke later on. But yeah, to kick it off, yeah, so using cover crops to reduce tillage within organic grain rotations. And like Kristen mentioned, this is the Cornell University Sustainable Cropping Systems Lab. So yeah, a lot of people involved with this research and this work. And then obviously a lot of support as well from funding agencies to do this research. So I'm going to kick it off here, and this is just some language from the National Organic Program standards. And there's actually only one place within the NOP where tillage is used, and it's right here. And it's that the producer must select and implement tillage and cultivation practices that maintain or improve the physical, chemical, and biological condition of soil and minimize soil erosion. So for some, this may sound simple, but this is actually kind of hard, especially when there's things out of our control like weather, especially the part about maintaining and improving the physical, chemical, and biological condition and minimizing soil erosion, especially with the presence of tillage. And so in its most basic form, what is tillage? Tillage is the mechanical manipulation of the soil where we are intentionally trying to make the soil fail. So tillage is, can be really valuable and great practice for loosening the soil, for warming the soil, for burying crop residues. But ultimately, we are intentionally trying to disturb the soil, and that's when we are exposing our soils to potential environmental risk. And so, at least in the Sustainable Cropping Systems Lab, the way that we have kind of approached this is what we call cover crop based organic rotational no-till. In its most simple form, we are trying to grow these big high biomass cover crops, and then we are later terminating those cover crops, usually with a roller crimper that you can see on the front of this picture. And so that roller crimper is crimping the cover crops to terminate it. And then those crimped cover crops are creating this heavy biomass, this really thick mulch to suppress weeds. But then the other thing we're trying to do is actually seed cash crop into that thick mulch. And so why cover crops? Well, there's lots of benefits that we can get from cover crops. And this is just a short list, but some valuable things that we can get is if you have a legume, for example, you're adding soil nitrogen. The cover crops compete with weeds to suppress them. You're adding organic matter, you're managing water. And so there's many benefits. But the way that I like to think about cover crops is there's also costs and unintended consequences from cover crops. So just like with the legume, that you can add nitrogen to the soil, with cereal rye, you can actually have nitrogen immobilization, which can be a problem for some crops, subsequent crops. There's specialized equipment. There's crop competition. There's potential weed legacy. In general, it increases your management complexity. And cover crops are very valuable, but they're not a silver bullet. And it all comes down to between those benefits and costs, that is finding that balance. And really, it's careful management is the most important in terms of that balance. And so, at least for cover crop based organic rotational no-till, we have to manage the cover crop like it matters, because the cover crop is performing many functions for it to work. And so to borrow some advice from Thomas Bjorkman at Cornell, if you want to make your cover crop work for you, you need to start clean. So here, you need to make sure perennial weeds are under control, and also annual weeds, but especially perennials in rotational no-till. And then you need to stay clean. And so this is, optimal seeding date, using quality seed, the right seeding rate, adequate for fertility, good seeding equipment. And then the other aspect is to kill on time. And so you don't want your cover crop to become a weed. And this is sometimes can be challenging if you're not using tillage. So the roller crimper has to really do a good job of terminating that cover crop. And so, of those 3 bullets, a lot of it was related to weeds. And so just a plug that this is a really great resource that is free. So this is a book that was out last year. This is Manage Weeds on Your Farm. And it is really paid, especially in organic systems, to know your weeds, their life histories, and how to manage them. So I really recommend this book. If you may be new to cover crops, this is also another great free tool. So this is a decision support tool that's from the Northeast Cover Crops Council. And basically, you can add these different inputs like your location and your goals, and then it will basically help you, how to incorporate cover crops into your system. And so here's one example. This is just a screenshot of the page. And, you can have your different cover cropping goals, but it also will include for your location, your planting window. And then you can, for each cover crop, you can find out lots about, different aspects of, its life cycle and rates. And it's a really good resource. So I highly recommend checking it out. So moving back to cover crop based organic rotational no-till. So like I said, we really need this cover crop to do lots of functions for us. Most namely, since we're not using tillage, we need to suppress weeds. And so one example is I'll be using basically 3 different cash crop examples, grain cash crops, corn, soybeans, and wheat. And so the first example where we've had success with this is organic no-till corn. So this is some work that we've done at Aurora, New York, the Musgrave Research Farm, and where we are growing these cover crops. So in this case, we have hairy vetch plus cereal rye, hairy vetch, winter canola, and then a tilled control as a comparison. And we're letting, we're planting those cover crops in early fall, and then letting them grow over winter. And then generally late May to early June, we're rolling, crimping those cover crops, and then no-till planting our cash crops into those. So in this example, we'll be talking about corn. And like I said, with this system, one of the main things we're trying to do is we're really trying to suppress weeds. And so on this x-axis, we have the cover crop biomass. And then on the y-axis, we have the weed biomass. And as you might expect, if you don't have a cover crop, so in this case, the tilled control, you're going to get a lot more weeds without having that cover crop there. But if you have good timing of planting of the cover crop, you can get lots of weed suppression, where it's less, basically lots of cover crop biomass, and then less than 500 pounds per acre of weed biomass. And so that's really what we want. But that's only one part of the story. So one of the issues of having all that cover crop biomass is it is a challenging environment to plant into. So you need good equipment, no-till planting equipment to get that seed into the ground. So this photo here is a photo of hairy vetch, and then some of the hairy vetch is not terminated in this case, but there's lots of, but you do have the corn emerging through. And this is some data from 2022 where it's a little bit dry, and there are some differences in terms of the emergence or the corn stand density between the different treatments. But for the most part, we're getting stands that are what we want in terms of getting a good yield. But not all cash crop and cover crop sequences are appropriate. So in this case, winter canola or cereal rye before corn is probably not the best choice, but a legume like hairy vetch produces lots of nitrogen. That is a good choice before corn. And so this is organic no-till hairy vetch, we're getting close to 140 bushels per acre of corn. And then much less with the winter canola and cereal rye. And so 2021, similar data, this was a wet year. And then also really great yields with the hairy vetch, but not so hot with the winter canola and cereal rye. And then in 2021, we also had a fertility treatment in which the fertility actually really didn't add a lot of extra yield, especially in the hairy vetch. So we're getting all of our fertility, a lot of it nitrogen from the hairy vetch. So another crop that we've been working with and have had some success is actually organic no-till winter wheat. And again, we're growing these big cover crops. In this case, this is late summer planted sorghum Sudan grass. And then we're rolling it down in mid to late September, and then no-till planting winter wheat right into that rolled crimped cover crop. And so, there's many different options in terms of cover crops that you could use. Sorghum Sudan grass does a great job with weed suppression. Sun hemp is a fairly drought tolerant legume that also works really well when seeding in mid to late summer. And this is a photo of the type of weed suppression you can get from these cover crops. And especially the picture on the right, that white frame that you see, that's actually a quadrat. That's how we collect the biomass to measure the amount of cover crop biomass. But you can see there's almost no soil, where that cover crop hasn't been collected in the quadrat. So we're getting good weed suppression and creating a nice mulch. And so this is just a photo of winter wheat later that year, and pretty weed free, and a good crop of winter wheat. And then to show some results. So we had different cover crops growing, and the main thing I want you to look at is this yellow line. So this yellow line for both tiles for field 1 and field 2, that's actually the line of where the tilled control was for the winter wheat. And field 1, we had great weed management, and in this case, the winter wheat did quite well for the organic no-till wheat. But then in field 2, we had some issues where we didn't manage our perennial weeds well, and so we had lower yields. So it all, again, starting clean is really important. Another idea of thinking about this winter wheat system is, again, you're establishing this cover crop in the summer. So on the far left, this is actually a mix of sorghum Sudan grass and buckwheat that has winter killed. And then we're actually seeding, no-till drilling the winter wheat into that sorghum Sudan grass and buckwheat cover crop. And in this case, we did not roll, and we're just letting basically what is terminating the cover crop is the frost killing. But we're establishing that winter cover crop, or sorry, the winter wheat. The winter wheat is emerging that next year. This is in the middle, a picture in the summer of what that winter wheat looks like. But then we can actually frost drill, or maybe even frost broadcast a legume into that winter wheat to prolong that period of no-till. So there's different ways of elongating that period of not doing any soil disturbance. Not only are you not doing soil disturbance, that's less wear and tear on your equipment, generally less labor. So yeah, there's some savings as well in terms of cost. So moving on to winter wheat, another area that our lab has done lots of work with is cover crop based organic rotational no-till soybean. This is probably where we have the most experience. And here, what we've used most commonly is cereal rye as the winter cover crop. But we've also used winter triticale with good success. And if you are interested in this system, we did put out organic no-till planted soybean production guide, and this is free and available online. And yeah, this is a good place to get started in terms of kind of everything you need to do to make the system work, and also to be aware of when and why the system doesn't work. But yeah, this is available online for free, and it's about 50 pages, and there's some farmer spotlights as well, like Luke Gianforte, who's here on the panel today. Yeah, he's highlighted, but a great resource. And like I said, we've had good success with organic no-till soybean, but it doesn't mean it's always successful. And usually when it's not successful, the reason why is because of early dry summers. And there's two figures on this slide. And so we'll look at figure A. And so this is basically the soybean yield. And basically we're dividing the no-till by the till to create a fraction basically. But then we have precipitation on the x-axis. And what you'll see is that in the really dry years, where we don't have a lot of rain between May 15th to June 15th, we're getting much lower yields in the no-till organic soybean than in like a tilled control comparison. But where we have really wet spring summers, that's when organic no-till really shines. And this is just the same data shown in a different way in B, but I'll highlight 2 years to kind of illustrate this point. So 2016 was a really dry year, or at least really dry early spring summer. And in this case, this blue bar is the till and the green bar is the no-till. And yeah, this is where it didn't do well. Another similar year where it's dry early in the summer is 2018, where yeah, we didn't have much precipitation, only about 1.5 inches over a month-long period. And then the till did much better than the no-till. And so, this is only one way of kind of explaining why it doesn't do well. There's many other factors as well, but it seems like the system, organic no-till soybean, does have challenges in dry years, which is, we're trying to, we're doing more research and trying to understand exactly why, or what are different practices to get around these challenges. And in this system, the organic no-till soybean, if we do have large weed infestations like this photo on the left, there's a bunch of common ragweed in there. What we have done in the past is kind of a rescue cultivation using a high residue cultivator. But then when you're using a high residue cultivator, it really doesn't, it's not a no-till system anymore. But you are managing the weeds, but you are doing tillage. So we have done more work more recently. You're looking at weed zapping to kill weeds, but also we've been doing, with the weed zapper, it's an electrified bar that's hitting the tops of the plants above the soybean canopy and killing them. So on the back is the generator, on the back of this tractor, on the front is electrified bar. And it works reasonably well, but maybe not as well as we expected. But another tool that we've been working with is an inter-row mower, which I think Stuart will be talking about as well. His experience with inter-row mower. And the inter-row mower works a little bit better than the weed zapper, but these are two different tools where we're not using tillage to control weeds with an organic no-till. And with that, thank you very much. And yeah, I don't think we'll have much time for questions, but maybe towards the end.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think the only question we got in the chat was Renee is asking for a little bit more of an explanation about a weed zapper. So maybe quickly we can do that. And I did just post a link to a video that also shows the weed zapper and inner row mower in action. But yeah, briefly, Chris.
Sure. Yeah, so briefly, yeah, the weed zapper, it's an electrified bar in front of that's attached to a tractor. And then there's many volts, many amps of electricity that is going through this electrified bar to kill weeds. And it's a fairly expensive piece of equipment. And I would say it's a better tool to reduce weed seed viability than really helping with weed competition. It's just a timing thing, but it's a newer practice, and so there's still, I guess, lots of questions that remain about it.
So also a question about the inner row mower, if it's something that we designed and built. Yeah,
so inter-row mowers, yeah, there's one commercially available. The one that was shown in the video, or sorry, shown the slides and the pictures, that was one that we did work with a manufacturer, fabricator, actually in Manitoba, to build for us. But there's a couple out there. So we didn't build it ourselves, but we did work with someone to help us build it.
Okay, great. Should we move on to Luke? And we should have some extra time at the end as well if there's more questions that come up for Chris.
Okay, can everyone see that?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so I'm going to build off of a little bit of what Chris said. Chris is doing a lot of great work down there at Cornell. That whole lab is doing a lot of really cool things. So we've kind of modified some different things, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing on our farm to try to incorporate some cover crops and reduce some tillage. So just a little background on who we are. We're located in Cazenovia, New York, which is right in central New York. We're growing majorly food grade crops, grains and row crops, corn, soybeans, wheat, oats, rye, buckwheat, sunflowers, variety, a little bit of everything. We try to do as much as we can as a food grade production, and we're marketing that throughout the East Coast. We do some on-farm processing of the oats. We roll all of our oats and sell them as rolled oats. We mill some flour. We also grind some feed and grind some cornmeal and soy meal for some local dairy farms. So we've been certified since the late 90s. So been at it for a while, still trying to figure out what we're doing. So historically, our use of cover crops would have been underseeded red clover and small grains. We typically grow a spring small grain, so spring wheat or oats are what we're most typically growing. That's because in our rotation, we struggle to get our soybeans off soon enough where we can get a good fall grain established. Our soybeans, being that they're a food grade soybean, we really aren't taking them off till late October, and then by that point in time, it's really too late to get a good establishment of a winter wheat or rye or something like that. So we typically grow a spring small grain, and historically we were interseeding red clover with that spring grain at the same time. That red clover would grow underneath the grain. We'd harvest it, and after harvest, the red clover would keep coming. And then the following spring, we would moldboard plow that, and then that would be put into corn. If we did happen to get a fall grain in, we would then cross seed the clover in February or March, and do the same thing. So our biggest challenge with that was the plowing. Let's see, I think I got there. Yeah. So the plowing, it's the downsides to it that I found is it's not great for soil health. It's completely inverting the soil profile. You can create a plow pan if you're out there when it's too wet. It takes a lot of time. There's no way we could get over the acres we need to cover with the equipment that we have, if we had to plow everything. So that was one of the main reasons we were trying to find a way to get away from it. And then the cost of the equipment, replacement parts for the plow, fuel for the tractor. So there's a handful of reasons that plowing has plenty of challenges. And then we still have to do multiple tillage passes after plowing to get it ready to plant. So timing was kind of a big thing on that. So like I had mentioned, our previous rotation was the small grain, with the clover under it. You can kind of see in this picture in the background, this is what it would look like. This wheat is actually swathed, but you can see the stubble there and the clover coming up through that. So it's a nice way to get clover established. We didn't have any problem with that. Our problem was more with the termination of the clover and needing to plow it to terminate that clover. So that led us to using cover crop mixes and trying to find something that we could plant rather than the clover that would be a little easier to terminate, and would give us some more biodiversity in the species that we're growing. We'd also done some soil health tests, and in the soil health tests, some of the recommendations that had come back were to try to get some more grasses as a cover crop, as well as legumes. And so the clover being just a legume, we want to try to get some more grasses in there. So we kind of worked on, by trial and error, developing some different cover crop mixes. And what we've kind of settled on is a mix basically based on oats and rye, is the two main grasses. We'll then have some peas in there, spring peas and winter peas. We'll have a handful of types of clover: red clover, white clover, sweet blossom clover. What else we'll throw some ryegrass in there, and then kind of depending on what we have around, we'll try some other things. But the majority of it is the oats and the rye. The idea with the oats is that we want to get a lot of growth in the fall, and we want something that can take up nutrients, applied nutrients. That is, we'll spread chicken litter on it. I'll get to that in a minute here. And so we want something that can absorb those nutrients and grow quickly in the fall, create a lot of biomass. But we don't want something like Chris was talking about with the rye. If we planted just a straight rye cover crop and then we're going to corn, we'd end up with a nitrogen deficiency, and it makes it difficult to terminate in the spring as well. So we're trying to play with that balance of oats to rye and how much of the mix is going to winter kill out, but we still want to have some greenery throughout the winter and through the spring, so that then we can, but not too much that it causes problems to terminate. We've also played around with some other summer cover crop mixes. That's what this picture is. It was just kind of some leftover seed we had on some fallow ground, just planting it in and just trying to get a diverse species growing. One of the things I find interesting about these mixes that I really like, you can plant the same mix over a whole field, and different places in the field will have different parts of the mix that are stronger just based on the soil. So it gives you kind of a good insurance policy that you got good coverage everywhere of something growing. It may not be all the same over the whole field, but it kind of naturally selects what needs to be what where. So this is what our current rotation is more like. We have the small grain, and then after the small grain comes off, we put the cover crop mix in, and that's in the late summer, early fall. And then that cover crop mix will get terminated and plant to corn, and then from corn we'll go to soybeans, and then back to the small grain. So here is harvest in August. We'll be taking off the small grain. In this case, this is oats. We're spreading all the straw back on the field. We're not harvesting any of the straw or baling it off. So we leave the straw there for the organic matter. And then immediately following the combine, we'll come through with a chisel plow and we'll rip up all that stubble. And I like doing this kind of tillage at this time of year. Typically it's drier at this time of year, so we can get down, bust up some compaction. We're not really worried about the wet spots. That's one of the challenges with plowing in the early spring. You end up trying to get your crops planted in time, and so you're pushing your luck on when you should or shouldn't be out there. So you end up working ground when it's a little wetter than ideal. In our case, anyhow, we do. So this way, where you got a lot better chance of having good dry ground, so you can really bust up that compaction. Does a nice job of tilling up, and so it works pretty well. So then in early September, we'll come through and we'll drill in that cover crop mix. Like I said, it's a multi-species mix. And one of the things that we do in it, we put the clover and the brassicas. We'll typically use radishes and turnips, and we'll put them in through the small seed box on the drill, so they're kind of staying on top. And we've modified the drill so that those brassicas end up on 30-inch centers, so they're going to be in the same rows where our corn crop will be planted the following year. We're able to do this. I utilizing all the GPS software to make sure the planters following the drill the following year. But this way, it kind of creates it's kind of like a strip till, a bio strip till, I call it. So those turnips and radishes are working down and kind of creating a deeper roots right over where that corn crop's going to go. So hopefully busting up some more compaction in there. And in the early spring, you can kind of walk across the field and you can almost feel where those radishes and turnips were by loosening up the soil. So you can kind of see that here it is in mid-September. You can kind of see those rows where you see the broadleafs in there. Those are the rows of turnips and radishes, and then all the rows in between will have clover with them. And so this is mid-September. We're getting a fair amount of growth so far, and this is right before we'll spread chicken litter on it. So we'll put 1 ton to 2 tons to the acre of belt layer manure on it. And we like doing this right prior to like a rain, so it kind of gets washed in, negates some of the smell. And then it also, because we have those grasses, the oats and the rye in there, you can see it, that the nitrogen gets taken up by those and actually gets utilized and converted into, an organic form. One of the things I'm concerned with when we spread on just straight clover is that clover is not going to take up the nitrogen the same way that the grasses would. So, and you can see the difference where the spreader turned on or off. So it is kind of reassuring that it's actually doing something. So after it's spread, this is what it's looking like in late September. A lot more growth there, got good color, and it's really starting to come on and fill out. And then by the middle of October, you can see it's really getting pretty thick. That's probably getting close to 12 to 14 inches tall. So it's nice and thick, creating a good coverage for the winter. So we should have good cover over the soil and have the soil pretty well protected throughout the winter. This is a little more, you can kind of see down in there that mixture. You can see some clover coming, the oats and the rye, the radishes and turnips pretty close together there in the row, busting up that compaction. And that's what we're looking for out of those turnips and radishes here. You can see in the bottom left of the screen there that radish really going down there and those roots getting in and creating a lot of, making some nice soil tilts, and that's the end goal really. So then, or the winter in January here, this picture was taken before we got any snow here in early January. You can see some of that rye is still kind of green under there, but a lot of those oats are starting to die off. They're getting killed out. So that's what we like to see, but there's still good soil cover. And we don't have bare soil exposed. And then as we go out throughout the winter, early March, you can still see here, you can see how that soil looks nice and friable. You can see some of the turnips and radishes, some of them have broken down and started to decompose already. Some of them are still there. The turnips, depending on how hard the winter is, some of them will pop back up in the spring and we'll get some more growth out of them in the spring. The radishes usually are pretty well killed off for the winter. So then mid-May, we'll come through and we'll terminate this cover crop. We'll use a high-speed disc to rip it up, and you can see in this picture here, it does a pretty good job of killing it, but we're only tilling about 2 to 3 inches deep, and so we're really not inverting much. We're keeping all that organic matter up on the surface, and those roots down in there from the turnips and radishes, we're still got that loose soil under those rows. And here you can see what I'm talking about with some of those turnips coming through in the spring. You can really see the rows of them here. So we'll hit it once with the disc, and then we will you can see how well it chops everything up and leaves the soil pretty nice, but still have all that organic matter up in the top. We're not inverting that and burying it. We're leaving it up in the top of the soil profile. A week or two later, depending on the weather, you can see everything's pretty well killed out. There's still a little bit of greenery out there. So we'll hit it one more time at a little different angle, and this will polish off anything left that's any of the cover crop that didn't get terminated the first time. And so that really fits it up nice, and then we'll immediately follow that pass with the planter, and we'll plant right into that. And it's a really nice seed bed to plant into. And we're following those same rows where the turnips and radishes were. You can kind of see the soil there and what it looks like. So then we'll come through and we'll tine weed for our weed control blind cultivation 1 or 2 times pre-emergence and then after the corn comes up. So that's another one of the things that we're looking to do with this cover crop mix. We want to keep that residue on the surface, but at the same time, we need to make sure that it's sized properly so that it doesn't plug up our weed control passes. So it's kind of a fine balancing act. We've found if the mix has too much rye in it, the rye, there'll end up being too much green rye in the spring, and then it'll plug up the tine weeder. So that's kind of that fine balance of trying to find out what the proper mix should be. And then we'll come through and cultivate in mid to late up until mid to late June, until the crop's canopied, and keep the weeds back, and then it's on its own. So that's kind of our main cover crop use that we're currently doing on a large percentage of our acres. Some other cover crops that we've used in the past and currently use, not necessarily all the time, but in certain places where we find them useful. We've done some sorghum Sudan grass. If we have a weed issue, we'll do a summer of seeding of sorghum Sudan grass, let that choke out some weeds. We've experimented a little, like Chris has talked about, with putting some winter grains into the sorghum Sudan grass. Experimented with that a little bit. We use buckwheat as more of a cash crop, but it definitely has some really good cover crop benefits. It's not really a really profitable cash crop, so it needs to have some cover crop benefits, but that makes a nice break in the rotation as well. And then sometimes we'll let the turnips and radishes go a little longer and actually take some of them for seed as well. So what do we do? What's next? What do we do, and how do we keep moving forward? One of the things I'd like to do more is get some more cover crops, some other places in the rotation. So we have an interseeder now, and this year was the first year we experimented a little bit with interseeding into standing corn and standing soybeans, trying to get something growing there in the late fall and over the winter, so that we got some more living roots in that soil all the time. So that's an ongoing experiment. We'll see how that works out. We're just getting started on it. And then we're going to continue to play around with the mix composition and try to really get dialed in on what works and what doesn't work. We're getting better at it, but trying to figure out how to make a cost-effective mix that establishes well, but also terminates well. And that kind of has to do with the timing and trying to always have something growing in the soil. So also trying to reduce tillage at other points, trying to eliminate as much as possible for soil health and economic reasons. So that is all I got there.
Great, thanks, Luke. So it looks like we have one question about some in-between row crimping, but maybe we'll save that one for the end, because I think Stuart is actually going to be talking about that, and maybe we can circle back to that. Oh, we do have one question. Renee is asking you, Luke, if you're selling your buckwheat grain.
Yes, we usually grow it on contract though.
All right, great. So yeah, we'll hand it over to Stuart now, and then again should have a for human consumption or feed. For the buck-
That'll be either for seed or human consumption.
All right, take it away, Stuart.
Okay, you can see the screen okay, I presume?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, thank you. So hello, everyone. We're based in eastern New York, the town of Ankrum. That's right over on the border. I've got a map a little bit later with Massachusetts and Connecticut. Only been going for, or in this location, only been going for, I guess, 8 years now. Growing food grade small grains, essentially. So hard red wheat is the main cash crop, and rye as well, both going for bread. The rye going for distilling as well, buckwheat for seed. We actually mill that into flour, buckwheat flour, sunflowers as well. We process those into oil, sell the oil. Black beans, just really experimenting with those at the moment, but there's a couple of local markets. All of this is going to local markets, local as defined by the 100 mile radius, and most of it going within 20-mile radius actually. So the focus is food grade. It usually makes it, sometimes it doesn't, but usually it does. Certified organic 6 years ago, and have a history of farming in England for many years. Location wise, that's where we are, right over on the east there, east of the Hudson River, right over on the border there. So it's in terms of soil type, it's a very light soil. It's a sandy silt loam, Blasdor Channery, for those of you interested, and it's got a lot of rocks, and that's I guess most people have. We seem to have got our fair share as well. It's so as light soil, it's got a low organic matter percentage. It's got very low CEC capacity, so it doesn't hold on to nutrients, particularly anions. We have to be really careful about what goes on when. And it's low native mineral content. So it's something that's, nutrition is important, obviously in that environment, but that's why cover crops are very important as part of that nutrition program. So this is about reduced tillage, but I thought I'd get a picture of the plow in there because I was brought up on plowing. I really enjoy it actually, but I know it's not a bad. I know it's not approved practice now, but I have to say I still enjoy it and did quite a bit this last September actually. So there we have it. Won't see that much longer. Rotation wise, just starting with rye somewhat randomly, but rye, and as Luke was doing, we are still putting red clover into that rye, overseeding or frost seeding the red clover into rye in usually early March, sometimes end of March. And we're actually keeping that red clover now for a second year as a crop. And the crop is essentially two crops. One is a hay crop. We have very lucky. We have a local organic dairy farm that takes a cutting of hay for red clover, and then this year we will also try and take a seed crop from it as well. As many of you might know, the cost of red clover seed is not trivial anymore. So I'm going to try and get a crop of that. And then year 3 is sunflowers, which we started off by just doing broadacre cultivations to put the sunflowers in. Traditional cultivations now are on the 3rd year of strip tilling into red clover, which is, I'll come on to that more later. And then after sunflowers, going into winter wheat, which makes a nice entry. And then after winter wheat, buckwheat. But because there's such a long gap between winter wheat and buckwheat, you're basically taking the wheat off in middle of July, the buckwheat goes in essentially 11 months later. So that's a really good slot there that we do a cover crop mix there. And as Luke said, we're still experimenting as well, but we've essentially got down turnip as the base, radish, and the clovers. Crimson seems to have done the best so far. Beersum has been less so. Flax and Fastidia I really like, and then sunflowers because that cheap seed because we grow it ourselves. So that goes in there as well because we have it. And that's the entry. That goes all the way through to June. When that's taken down, we plant buckwheat into that. And then after buckwheat, we actually go back into rye normally, and the rye is purely as a cover crop for entry into black beans, which again, I'll talk about that more later. So the rye there is acting as a cover crop as opposed to a cash crop. Oats and einkorn are in there because not all of the fields, particularly the rocky ones, the hilly ones, are not suitable for the beans. So that goes into oats or einkorn there. So that's the rotation. And in terms of improvements, the strip tilling is still a work in progress. You'll see what I mean later. And the planting beans, Chris mentioned this, the research that's been done with soybeans and planting. We actually plant, we've got a very old planter, so we don't try and plant into the rolled rye. We plant into the rye as it's standing and then come back and roll a crimp. And that's purely a practical consideration of not trying to fight through the rye when it's down, but doing it after, rolling it after the planting has been done. And then this year, I'm hoping we've got a neighbour who can graze, run some livestock over some of the cover crops. So in terms of I'm not going to go into the objectives here. Chris has already covered those, but on the top there here, the main use cases we have for using cover crops for weed control is the undersown red clover, very well established practice, super reliable. And we've got some pictures of that later. And then, as I mentioned, we're using roller crimped rye as a mulch for beans. And the red clover, the idea, as you saw on the rotation, this red clover will effectively nearly be down for 3 years. And in the sunflowers themselves, outside of what's been strip tilled, 2/3 of the field is still living red clover while the sunflowers are growing. That presents challenges, which we'll come on to, but that's the idea really, is to have something sort of semi-perennial, 3 years anyway, in the ground for that time. And then the last bullet point here has been quite relevant. We've expanded a little bit, sort of not particularly by planning, frankly, just some landowners locally sort of like the idea of organic and regenerative, so have offered their land, which we've taken. And having done that 3 times now, I've learned, it took me a little while, maybe a bit slow, but trying to take a cash crop off the first year after something conventionally farmed in corn and soy is not a good idea. So this year, or last year now, we put in a cover crop mix in the spring and just let that grow all through to September before going into the first cash crop. And there was a conversation with the landlord about how much rent I was going to pay for that, which turned out to be 0. But quite important as an entry into new land or a new cropping situation. So this is the first use case. So this is the classic undersown red clover into rye, and this was taken this summer in September. And you can see as I think we all know, it's a super dry year this year. So what you're seeing there, the brown triangle piece, is basically dead or certainly mature foxtail grass. There's not, I would like to say it's rye stubble, it's not, it's foxtail grass weed. And then the rest of the field, which has the red clover that I didn't miss on it, is not particularly lush this year because of the drought, but certainly a nice stand of red clover. So you can see very, very easily there the weed control that you get just by that red clover being there as opposed to not being there. And then we obviously have the nitrogen benefit of that as well. So that I think that's a nice example of red clover acting as a weed suppressant from after harvest. So this is this is after harvest, after wheat harvest that is, and putting in that cover crop before buckwheat. So this is that mixed-eyed turnip, radish, clover, Phacelia, flax going in here. Actually not Phacelia. But and one of the, Luke mentioned this, one of the challenges is like what proportions of mix do you have? What first of all, what do you have in there, and what proportion do you have those in? And one of the considerations that I use on that is basically the seeding rate. So the way I put most of my cover crops in with this little air seeder. So it's the smallest one I can get on them. I'm struggling machine wise to lift this. This is a speed disc. The yellow box is essentially an air seeder. And so I'm looking for small seeds, low seeding rates, so I can I can have small equipment essentially and not fill up every 5 minutes. So basically putting in 20 pounds an acre is the maximum I like to put on, which with small seeded clovers and flax and radish and other brassicas is pretty easy to do. You get a nice mix for that pretty reasonable cost outside of the clovers, but for very low seeding rate, relatively low seeding rate versus something heavier like peas. So that makes it nice and simple, nice and quick. And then that then gets going, and this is what it looked like. This was in October, that same field where you can see the radish and the turnip and some, actually, yeah, there was some summer grasses in there which didn't do too well. But there's the flax in there down the bottom right. So a nice mixture. And that's essentially still got some straw you can see on the top right there from the small grain harvest. So you've got a nice a lot of high carbon organic matter there, along with this lush succulent mix that's still growing there in October. So changing gears, this is roller crimping. You can just about see the roller crimper on the front of the tractor there. And this is rolling rye after the beans after black beans have just about come up. On the right-hand side of that picture, it's difficult to see, frankly, but if you use your imagination, you can see rows of black beans down there. But this is an alternative system, not alternative, but timing-wise, it's different. So beans planted first, and then into standing rye, and then crimping afterwards after the beans have established. So that's what this is. That's what this is here. And then this is, I guess, a couple of weeks later, when the beans are a little bit more established. As Chris said, I mean, this system does not work well in a dry year. We had a super dry year last summer. So they sat like this for 2 weeks, I want to say. They came out, they looked okay, and then they just looked okay and the same for about 2 weeks, which is extremely nerve-wracking, with good reason, as it turns out, because they did not do very well. So, but that's what it looks like after, I guess, 4 weeks, 5 weeks after the roller crimping. Oops, wrong way. So we had a real bad mare's tail weed problem this year that just came up everywhere, and it came up in the beans as well. So those tall, you'll probably recognize them. That's a nice crop of mare's tail there. So luckily, one of the things that we'd been working on over that last winter was an inter-row mower, and that's what that contraption, that sort of Goldberg contraption you see on the back of the tractor there, is an inter-row mower, sort of pieced together from a very old inter-row cultivator. And then instead of the shovels and the tines for the cultivator, you can't really see it there, but in front of each of those gauge wheels is a hydraulic motor, and it's got a standard 22-inch mower blade jury-rigged onto the bottom of each of the spindles of those hydraulic motors. And then there's a hydraulic tank, and that you can see the big black square or cube is a hydraulic oil tank. The tractor's not big enough. It hasn't got enough hydraulic capacity to run the hydraulic motors off its own hydraulic system. So this is an independent hydraulic system to run those motors. With a more modern tractor with a higher capacity, you could do this without having that extra auxiliary oil tank and pump. But this, to my frankly surprise, works quite well. It was super slow, like 2 miles an hour, super slow, but it worked reasonably well. And I think the reason it worked reasonably well is the mare's tail is quite woody, so it chops pretty well. So those mower blades, and they're just literally standard mower blades, slice through them pretty well. I frankly would not want to know what it would do in a grass situation. Doubtless we'll have that challenge soon, but in this situation with woody sort of thick-stemmed mare's tail, it actually chopped them down pretty well. So that was, I think, a pleasant surprise. So shifting gear again, this August just gone. This is putting strips into the red clover in the fall, in August, I should say. So the idea here is, so this was rye 2 years ago. It's the red clover that was taken for hay. So this has been down 2 years now, putting the strips in the fall and planting into those strips, basically radish and tillage down the strips with that same air streets, that same air seeder moved over to a different piece of equipment that drops, in this case, radish and turnip down those tubes into the row, or onto the row, I should say. That's the idea there. And then I actually haven't got a picture of what it came up like, which I apologize for that, I should have done. This is the following spring, or in this case, the previous spring, and freshening the strips in the spring following the autumn, the previous autumn, where the turnips and the radish was planted. So this is coming in the spring and refreshing the strips. Now, I would like to say I run down the same rows, and it's a little bit, I don't have GPS. It'd be good to have GPS, obviously, but I don't. So there's no guarantee. I try and get down the rows, but it's by no means that accurate, frankly. So, but that said, it does create a nice tilth. There's a nice moist, well structured seedbed in those strips. And that's the strip till machine on the right. There's a pretty standard machine, and there, I don't know whether you can see it on the right hand side there. There are fluted or wavy, I should say, coulters, and that's the refreshing coulters. So rather than dragging a shank down the strip, we've got those coulters, those wavy coulters to freshen up strips. And then this is coming in the next day or the same day and planting into those strips. You can see there, so it's just a very old planter, but it works fine. And putting on a fertilizer mix there as well, a fish molasses mix and traces down the row there as well. But otherwise just regular planting. And then this is the challenge. This is the reality of this year. Was a disaster, frankly. So on the left there, we've got the sunflowers coming up in the strips. You can see them there, but you can sort of see the problem that immediately is there as well, is the clover, which is, what the good thing and the bad thing about red clover. It's aggressive. It keeps growing, and essentially, I mowed it back a couple of times before the sunflowers got too high, but I basically lost the battle of the clover and the sunflowers, and that, exacerbated by a dry summer, meant there was no harvest from this field. As you can see, those sunflowers essentially, that's what it looked like, which is pretty embarrassing, but there we go. So not a good thing to do. Still persisting with this idea and changing the tooling for this spring to manage the red clover more often. I've got to change the tool set to do that. And I'm also changing the nutrition at planting time to try and get those sunflowers more aggressive. Just conscious of the time, so I'm going to speed through the rest of this. Again, this is establishing using a cover crop on new land. I mentioned that third use case or fourth use case. This is going into what wasn't my corn, somebody else's corn, and putting on that mix on the back of the tailgate there, essentially clover mix, turnip, flax, and phacelia and sunflowers, again with the speed disc. And that's created a beautiful mix in the summer. It really was just a joy to see all the different, all the clovers in there, the flax, the turnips, the radish. You can see you just about see some clovers and the odd sunflower in there as well. So that looked good, and it certainly caused a few comments locally. And then pour that down in September on the right hand side there, just chopping that in single pass system, chopping it up, ready for drilling. And I've got this slide here just to make a point here about, this is one of the, about tillage. So we just try and use a one pass system for breaking down or incorporating these cover crops. And the downside of that is you're not killing everything. You can't kill everything with one pass. And certainly you can see on the left-hand side of this picture there, this is after rye has been drilled. There's quite a population there of turnips and radish, which I knew would happen, and it did happen. And I don't worry about it because they get taken out by the frost. And that same field now, you just see rye rows. You don't see any turnip and radish because they've been knocked out by the frost. So maybe taking a little bit of a risk, but for the the damage of the tillage and the cost of the tillage, and relying on winter to kill seems to have worked out. Seems to work, but I would be aware of the risks of doing that. And then this is the field actually after sunflowers last year, believe it or not. Obviously the sunflowers didn't come off, but it certainly set it up well. The tilth there is really nice. So the clover and the failed sunflowers, certainly a nice entry for wheat this year. So that's it. That's all I have. There's just a few other things. It's a bit of nice, always have a nice field of buckwheat there as well. But that's the end of the presentation.
Great, thanks so much, Stuart. Looks like we have one question for you about whether you have a problem with deer browsing sunflowers and how you might manage that.
Definitely, the deer love the sunflowers, and there's significant losses every year. They just go in and eat the head, and you find these. In terms of managing them, we don't. I mean, we just sort of give the angel share, as they say. So we don't manage them, but there is significant damage.
All right, well, let's see, looks like we have about 5 more minutes. So I think we can go back to the question from Little Seed about between row suppression with a crop cutter like Dawn in-roll or roll a cone stalk cutter. So maybe, Stuart, I know you have been looking into that. Chris, I imagine you might also have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to use, I now have one, an in-roll I purchased over winter for exactly that purpose, is to have another tool to manage those inter-row weeds, and particularly the clover, which is not a weed, but it still needs managing, as you saw. So I am going to be using the in-roll this spring.
Yeah, and I have no personal experience with the in-roll, but yeah, I've seen some videos and looked it up, and yeah, it seems like interesting tool. From what I gathered from it, you know, you can both do like rolling and crimping with the in-roll, but you can also change the blades on it, and it can be more like a cutting action too, similar to the effect that Stuart and is trying to get with the intro mowing in terms of cutting weeds. So the in-roll seems like an interesting tool for both rolling and crimping between rows and potentially doing some cutting between rows.
And we have a question from Cynthia. Anyone ever try interplanting sugar snap peas and rye or tall grasses? Cynthia, would this be like in a rolling, like a roll crimp scenario with the rye, or are you thinking standing? Maybe you can clarify perhaps, but there are some, to harvest trellis the peas. So we do have a couple farmers that we work with that are doing some interesting things, trying out interplanting, not sugar snap peas, but mostly field crops. So grain peas, a winter grain pea with a winter small grain, and actually being able to successfully combine them for grain. But certainly with sugar snap peas, that might be a little bit different. But the Ecological Farming Association of Ontario has some cool trials with sort of vegetable systems and organic no-till. So I know there's often a lot of veggie growers at this conference, so that might be a cool thing to check out. Jason, I'm curious to know which cover crop species you have tried in the past, but will not use moving forward. That's a great question. Maybe we can go to Luke first and then Stuart.
Yeah, I guess I don't know that I have anything in particular that I won't ever use again. I think a lot of them have value. I guess it depends on, it comes down to seed costs sometimes too, is one of the things that we're concerned with, because it's not going to be there for a long time. So whatever is going to be there needs to grow quick and then be terminated. So it has to have some benefit. We've had challenges with using just straight rye before, like Chris mentioned, the nitrogen deficiency that you can end up by using just rye. But that being said, we still use rye quite a bit. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add that it's more the situation, but I'm not going to use the summer grasses again, not because they're not good, just but they don't work in the system that I've tried. I'm putting them in too late to get the benefit from them, basically putting them in after small grains, which is fine if you get the rain, but it's not if you don't. So that can be quite expensive seed, and sun hemp as well. I'd love for those to work, but in the system we have the reliability and getting that length of time. As Luke mentioned, if you're going to buy expensive seeds, you need to get the value out of it. And if you're only getting a few weeks because of lack of rain, that's a problem. So not anything against the species themselves, but just in the system we have, putting them in after small grain harvest is just, we're not getting the value out of them.
I think that goes to what Chris was speaking about, is sort of managing the cover crop and finding the right cover crop for the goal, and this point in your rotation is kind of the name of the game. Let's see. Have any of you tried mowing rye, wheat cover in no-till seeding soybean? A farm in Vermont using mowing due to timing of planting and termination of rye. So this is looking at, I'm thinking mowing instead of roll crimping. Chris, do you want to maybe take that one?
Sure. Yeah, so Robert, I don't have firsthand experience, but I'm familiar with some people have looked at different termination methods of cereal rye, and mowing can work, but one of the issues with mowing is, one, it doesn't always successfully terminate the cereal rye, and two, it does, if you do mow it, you do get some weeds that can grow through it. So it may not be a practice that I would recommend, just due to risk. Yeah, it's somewhat variable. It can work, but there are some potential issues with it.
And we do have a kind of a current trial that similarly is harvesting forage before planting no-till soybean, kind of a similar effect, and we found that it seems to work pretty well, but definitely depends on what weeds you have underneath there that can come up and become a problem. Can you explain why rye causes a nitrogen deficiency? So really that's about nitrogen tie-up rather than, the nitrogen is still there, but it's immobilized by that cereal rye biomass. So I don't know if anyone has particular, I think how long it would take to decompose probably depends quite a bit on environmental factors, but anyone have any more specific insight into timing of that tie-up throughout the season?
Well, I see the beans sit there for 2 weeks, as in not growing, which difficult to know how much of that is water, competition for water, but nitrogen is certainly the nitrogen type is certainly the theory that I have, and I'm going to be addressing that with nutrition next year or this year. But of course, you don't want the rye to decompose in the system. You want the rye to stay there and act as a mulch. As it decomposes, you're going to lose the benefit of the mulch and the weed control. So you can't really wait for it to decompose, because then you've lost that benefit. So I think it's more of a nutrition in the row nutrition to try and offset the tie-up of the nitrogen by the rye.
All right, well, if there are no more questions, I think we're just a few minutes over. Just dropping a link in the chat to our lab's website. You can learn more about what we're doing and reach out. I think both Stuart and Luke have, their farms have websites as well. So I'm sure they'd also be happy to hear from folks if you have other questions. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us.
On behalf of NOFA, thank you all for presenting. This was incredibly informative, and I just really appreciate all of your time.
Thank you.